I didn't plan on telling this story. Honestly, I thought I'd bury it the same way I buried every long shift, every insult, every quiet moment where I told myself, just hold on a little longer. But that night, the night my boss left me outside in the rain like I was some stray dog he was trying to train, something in me snapped, not loud, not dramatic, just clean, like a wire inside finally giving way. It started at 6:42 p.m., the kind of early evening darkness that doesn't wait for the sun to finish setting. The storm wasn't just heavy, it was the kind of rain that feels intentional, like the sky is trying to erase everything beneath it. I stood by the loading dock, soaked through my hoodie, water dripping down my sleeves and into my boots. The delivery truck was late, again, and the only thing colder than the rain was knowing why I was out here in the first place. Mike, my manager for 2 years, a man who believed leadership was just bullying with a clipboard, the type who said things like, pressure makes diamonds, but never noticed he was grinding down people, not stones. He'd catch me on break and say, clock says 15 minutes, oh, so don't even breathe after 16. He'd nitpick the way I stacked pallets, the way I swept, the way I existed. And every time he found something small, he'd smile that short, sharp smile men wear when they think they've got power. That day, he decided I needed a lesson. The shipment was scheduled for 6:30, thunder already shaking the metal siding. I was about to grab a rain jacket when he blocked the office doorway with his arm. "Leave it," he said. "It's pouring," I answered. "Good. Helps you focus. Stand by the dock until the truck shows. Don't come inside. If you can't handle a little weather, maybe you're in the wrong job." Little weather. Rain was coming down sideways, slapping the concrete so hard it bounced. "Mike, the scanner won't even—" He cut me off. "I said stay outside. If you go anywhere, you can turn in your badge tomorrow." 2 years of swallowing my pride, of telling myself I needed this job until things stabilized, of ignoring the way he always singled me out, because I worked harder than the ones he liked, which meant he could load more weight on me without hearing complaints. So I stepped outside, and the door shut behind me. The warehouse windows glowed warm and yellow. Inside, the guys were finishing their shifts, dragging brooms, laughing about weekend plans. I stood under a broken gutter that poured straight down my neck. The cold crept in like it had hands. Minutes passed slow and heavy. My hoodie clung to me like wet concrete. Every few seconds, a gust would hit hard enough to steal my breath. At some point, I stopped shaking and just felt numb. People think moments like this feel angry. They don't. They feel empty, like your mind steps outside your body to watch from a distance. Mike looked through the window once, just to make sure I was still there. Then he turned away. I could have cursed him, walked off, quit on the spot. But I needed the paycheck, and he knew it. That was the power he enjoyed most. The quiet kind. The kind where he didn't need to shout. He just needed you to need the job. At 7:05, lightning flashed so bright, it turned the parking lot white. I checked the road again. No headlights, no truck. Just an empty stretch of wet asphalt and my reflection in every puddle. Tired eyes, soaked hair, jaw clenched from the cold. By 7:12, my phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't dare pull it out in the storm. Inside, the crew clocked out one by one. I watched their silhouettes through the fogged glass. Nobody opened the door. Nobody asked why I wasn't inside. Quiet avoidance. The survival instinct of warehouse workers everywhere. When the last of them left, the building felt huge and hollow. Only one office light stayed on, Mike's, the man who didn't believe in favoritism but always took long lunches with the same 2 guys. The man who talked about earning respect, but couldn't lift a pallet jack without calling for help. By 7:20, a puddle had formed around my boots, deep enough to soak through the soles. My fingers were stiff and red. My teeth wouldn't stop knocking. And then, through the thick curtain of rain, faint headlights appeared far down the road. For a second, I thought it was the delayed truck. Finally, arriving to end this miserable shift, But the lights were too steady, too slow, too deliberate. A black SUV rolled toward the warehouse gate. New, clean, not company issued. It pulled up to the dock. Engine idling, tinted windows reflecting the floodlights. My heart thumped once, the kind of thump that means something is about to shift, even if you don't know in which direction yet. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, umbrella in hand, dry, calm, focused. Not a delivery driver, not a contractor, not anyone who should have been there this late. He looked at me for a long, assessing moment, and then he said my name. But that was just the beginning. He said my name like it wasn't a guess. Ethan? My brain took a second to catch up. Nobody from corporate knew my face. They knew badge numbers, productivity charts, colored graphs. They didn't know the guy shivering on the dock. I blinked rain out of my eyes. Yeah. He stepped closer under the floodlight, angling the umbrella so it covered both of us without making it look like charity. Late 30s, maybe 40. Trim beard, neat jacket, shoes that had never seen a pallet jack. Wow, he breathed. More to himself than to me. Didn't think I'd see you here. I squinted. It clicked a half-second later. David? 2 years disappeared just like that. I saw him again in a different building, in a different town, back when I was doing temp work in a smaller warehouse. He'd been one of the only supervisors who actually grabbed boxes instead of just pointing at them. We weren't friends, not really, but he'd been decent. He'd been human. Now he was standing in front of me in a corporate jacket with a discreet logo on the chest. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, scanning me from hair to boots. "In this?" I glanced at the closed dock doors, the office window. Mike's shadow moved behind the blinds, big and slow, like a shark pretending to be a man. "Waiting for a truck," I said. David looked at the empty driveway, then back at me. "There's no truck scheduled after 6, he said quietly. "I moved tomorrow's deliveries up. That's why I'm here." The rain seemed to get louder. He frowned. "How long have you been standing out here?" I checked the phone I still hadn't dared to pull out. "Since 6:30. He swore under his breath. Not loud, not performative, just a word that slipped out of someone who'd stepped in something they didn't expect. "Who told you to stay?" "Mike," I said. "Store manager." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded like a puzzle piece had just locked into place. "Come inside," he said. "That's an order." For the first time in 40 minutes, I stepped out of the rain. The air inside the warehouse hit me like a wall. Warm, dry, smelling like cardboard and dust. My clothes steamed. Water dripped off me, making little dark constellations on the concrete. Mike met us halfway down the main aisle, his walk a mix of confidence and confusion. He'd clearly seen the SUV. He just hadn't expected anyone to get out and know my name. "Evening," he said, voice pitched up half a note too high. Didn't know we had visitors. "David Calder," the man beside me said, holding out a hand. "Regional Operations Director." You could feel the words hit. Mike's face did a tiny twitch at director before he smoothed it out. "Mike Turner, good to meet you," he said, gripping his hand a little too long. "We weren't told you were dropping in tonight." "Last-minute decision," David replied. "Weather was supposed to be worse tomorrow. Figured I'd get eyes on the site before the audits start next month." He said it casually, but Mike heard the word that mattered. "Audits. Of course," Mike said quickly. "We run a tight ship here. Ethan was just standing outside in a thunderstorm," David cut in, his tone mild. "Alone, with no scheduled truck?" Mike's jaw flexed once. "Just a little discipline," he said lightly. "He tends to drift if you give him slack. Sometimes you have to show the team you mean what you say." He smiled at David like this was a shared joke between managers. That was the thing about Mike. He always thought there was a we he belonged to. Him and whatever authority was above him, looking down on the rest of us. David didn't smile back. "Interesting," he said, "because where I come from, telling an employee to stand outside in a lightning storm counts as a safety violation. not a teaching moment. The irritation in his voice wasn't directed at me. That alone felt new. Mike's eyes flicked to me, then back to David, recalibrating. The storm picked up after he went out, he said, and Ethan's not exactly fragile. There it was. Turn it into a compliment. Make it sound like he believed in me. He could have come back inside if it got bad, Mike added. I expect my guys to use their heads. I'm not babysitting. A year ago, I would have stayed quiet, nodded, smoothed it over so I wouldn't be the problem. I was still dripping on the floor when the words came out of my mouth. You said if I went anywhere, I could turn in my badge tomorrow, I said, voice even. Those were your exact words. The silence after that line was different from the usual warehouse quiet. It had weight. David looked at me, then at Mike, then at the dark streak of water spreading under my boots. Is that true? He asked, and Mike let out a short laugh that didn't sound like him. You know how it is, he said. You've managed crews. Sometimes you say things a little sharper so people take you seriously. We're men, not hall monitors. He clapped me on the shoulder like we were buddies. Ethan knows I don't mean half the things I say about firing him. I didn't move. David's eyes dropped to Mike's hand on my shoulder, then rose back up with a slowness that wasn't accidental. Let go of him, he said quietly. Something shifted there, small, precise. Mike's hand slipped away like it had been burned. That's not how I run teams, David continued, and it's not how this company wants them run either, not with the audits coming up. He said, this company like it was something bigger than both of them, bigger than me, too. Mike stiffened. With all due respect, I've hit every number you've sent us, he said. We clear stock faster than any branch in this region. If I have to be the bad guy sometimes to get it done, well, not everybody can handle the heat. He nodded toward me, like I was Exhibit A. I'd heard some version of that speech 100 times. From him. From people like him. It always meant the same thing. I'm efficient, so they'll let me get away with what I do to you. For the first time, it didn't just annoy me. It made my skin crawl, because now someone else was watching. David's expression didn't change much, just the slightest tightening around the eyes. I like heat, he said. I don't like liability. He turned to me. Go grab a change of clothes if you have them, or at least a dry jacket. Then clock out. You're done for the night. I still have... That wasn't a suggestion, he said. His tone stayed gentle. The words didn't. I nodded and headed toward the break room, every step leaving water behind. My fingers shook as I spun my locker combination, but it wasn't from the cold anymore. I didn't have spare clothes, just a slightly less wet sweatshirt and an old pair of socks. I changed anyway, listening to the muffled rumble of voices from the main floor. Mike's pitch went up when he got defensive. You could always tell. I sat on the bench for a second, breathing, watching the second hand on the locker room clock. Part of me wanted to walk out and never come back. Another part knew that walking away right now would let Mike write the story however he wanted. So I walked back. They were by the receiving desk, clipboards, open binder. Mike's arms crossed, the way he did when he thought he was about to win an argument on technicality. Ethan, David said when he saw me, quick question. Any other lessons like tonight I should know about? I hesitated. Mike's eyes on me were not a question. They were a warning. Be careful what you say. That look used to translate to, we have to work together tomorrow. But something had shifted in me on that dock. That night, I stopped being the guy who protected other people's bad behavior with my silence. He's told me more than once that if I don't like how things are, there's a line of people who'll take my place, I said slowly. He's put write-ups on my file for things I've never seen, threatened to cut my hours when I asked for a day off to take my mom to a doctor's appointment, and he likes to do it in front of the crew. I swallowed. And tonight, you saw the rest. My voice was steady. I hated that my hands weren't. Mike's laugh this time was louder, more forced. You hear this? He said. This is what I'm talking about. Victim mentality. Guy wants the job without the grind. I ride everybody here, not just him. Ask the team. The team's not here, David replied. Just us. And for what it's worth, I worked with Ethan before. Different branch, different state. He wasn't fragile there. He was the one I'd trusted with the overnight shifts. Mike blinked, hard. You two know each other, he said, like he'd just discovered a conspiracy. That would have been nice to disclose. I didn't know he was here until I pulled up, David answered. But I'm glad I did. Saves me some time. Time for what? Mike asked. David flipped a page on the binder. His voice stayed level, but his patience was wearing thin around the edges. Next week, I'm running a series of unannounced safety assessments and leadership reviews across this region, he said. Your site was already flagged for a closer look. Inventory discrepancies, exit interview comments, high turnover. Mike's face darkened. We move product, he repeated. Like that cleared everything. This is a warehouse, not a daycare. I felt it then, that small, guilty relief when someone finally says out loud what you've been feeling for months. I'm not looking for daycare, David said. I'm looking for adults who understand you don't motivate people by seeing how far you can push them before they break. He closed the binder. The sound was louder than it should have been. We'll talk more tomorrow, he added. Early, 8 sharp. Have your last 3 months of write-ups and performance reports ready, and your safety logs. Mike opened his mouth, then shut it again. His tongue pressed against his cheek like he was swallowing a punch. Fine, he said. David turned to me again. Go home, he repeated. Seriously, hot shower, dry clothes, take care of yourself. It was such a simple sentence. Most managers I'd known used take care of yourself as a polite goodbye. With him, it sounded like an actual instruction. Okay, I said quietly. As I walked toward the time clock, Mike's stare burned between my shoulder blades. I could feel it, the resentment, the calculations, the way he was already rewriting the narrative in his head to make himself the victim of insubordination and me the difficult employee. I clocked out, grabbed my backpack, pushed open the back door. The rain had eased to a steady curtain instead of a full assault, but every surface still gleamed under the parking lot lights. David's SUV sat like a black shape at the edge of the lot. From the dock, I'd looked small and alone. From here, the building behind me suddenly looked less like a prison and more like what it really was, a place of work, one I could leave. I opened my car door and sat for a moment, listening to the rain on the roof. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We'll talk tomorrow. Get some rest. D. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I didn't know it yet, but that message was the first crack in Mike's whole structure. The night he left me in the rain wasn't just cruel. It was the night he handed someone else the exact rope they'd later use to pull his title right off his chest. The next morning, the storm was gone, but the warehouse felt heavier than the sky ever had. Air too still, light too sharp, the kind of quiet you get right before a power line snaps. I pulled into the lot 10 minutes early, not because I wanted to impress anyone, because my body had decided on its own that being late today would feel like stepping into a trap. Mike's truck was already parked, headlights off, windows fogged. Either he'd arrived early to prepare, or he hadn't slept much at all. Inside, the warehouse buzzed with a strange, brittle energy. Guys moved faster, quieter. No one talked. Nobody wanted their words to land in the wrong pair of ears. I was halfway through changing into my work boots when the office door opened. David, clipboard in hand. Calm face. The kind of calm that isn't peace. It's precision. Morning, everyone, he said, scanning the floor. We'll start in the conference room. Mike, bring your logs. Mike walked past us with a stiffness I'd never seen on him. His shoulders usually rolled with a cocky swagger, like he owned the concrete we walked on. Today his steps were small, tight, controlled. The door closed behind them. We all stared for a second. Think he's in trouble? One of the newer guys whispered. No, I said quietly. I think we're in the part before trouble. For an hour the warehouse hummed with the restless silence of people pretending to work while straining to hear through the walls. Every so often a voice broke through. Mike's, sharp and too loud, then abruptly quiet. Then David's, steady, clean, cutting without raising the volume. Around 10, the office door opened. Mike walked out, pale, jaw clenched so tight it twitched. He crossed the floor without looking at anyone and disappeared into the manager's room. David stepped out behind him, scanning the warehouse until he found me. "Ethan," he said, "walk with me." My stomach tightened. I wiped my hands on my pants and followed him through the loading bay. We stopped by the far wall, near the old shelving no one used anymore. Neutral ground. "I need to verify a few things you mentioned yesterday," he said. "Not to put it on you, but to make sure everything lines up." I nodded. "Ask." He asked about the threat when I took my mom to her appointment, about the write-ups I'd never signed, the night shifts where I'd covered 2 roles because Mike wanted to test initiative, about the way he talked to us during rush weeks, how he'd stand on the mezzanine and shout down like a foreman from a century ago. I told him everything, not angry, not shaking, just stating facts. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose, slow, controlled. "Thank you," he said. "One more thing. Did he ever threaten to cut hours or fire anyone else the way he did with you?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, because saying it felt like opening a door we'd all kept shut for too long. "Yes," I said finally. "A few of the younger guys, and Luis from night shift. Mike said he was replaceable because his English wasn't strong." David's jaw tightened a fraction, not anger, calculation. "All right," he said. "That helps a lot." We walked back across the warehouse, but halfway there, David stopped again. "You okay?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Most managers asked it the way people ask, "How's the weather?" A filler. Not this time. "I'm not bad," I said. "Better than last night." "Good," he said, "because this next part might get loud." He wasn't wrong. At noon, the regional audit team arrived. Clipboards, safety vests, the whole corporate caravan. They didn't look at us. They looked through the building, at the racks, at the logs, at the emergency exits, at the cameras, at the structure, at the man running it. Mike tried to play host at first. Big gestures, fast explanations, like he could win points with enthusiasm. But David stayed close behind him, watching every answer. By 2 o'clock, the audit team had formed a little cluster around the safety cabinet. They whispered, pointed. One of them wrote faster. Mike's voice rose a notch. "We've been short-staffed," he said. "I've been doing the best I can without corporate support. Anyone could make a few little errors." Another auditor interrupted. "These aren't little." Mike laughed, high and thin. "Come on, you guys know how warehouses are. Sometimes you bend a rule or two to get the job done. My performance numbers speak for themselves." "That's the part that concerns us," the auditor said. "You're hitting productivity targets and breaking safety compliance at the same time. That's a pattern." A few of the guys stood frozen behind their pallet jacks, pretending to sort freight while listening like their lives depended on it. And then Mike said the line that ended everything. "If my team weren't so soft, maybe I wouldn't have to push them so hard." Silence. Real silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. David stepped forward, slow, controlled. "Say that again," Mike bristled. "You heard me." "I did," David said, "but I want to be absolutely certain that I'm documenting your exact words." For the first time since I'd known him, Mike looked unsure. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Let me make this simple," he said. "Your numbers are high because you're driving your crew through intimidation. Your safety logs are falsified. Your write-ups don't align with policy. And last night, you put an employee in physical danger. That's not leadership. That's negligence." "This is ridiculous," Mike snapped, but his voice cracked. "You're taking his side? Over mine?" David glanced at me. Not long, not meaningfully, just enough for Mike to see exactly what choice had already been made. "My side," David said, "is the company side. And the company doesn't tolerate managers who create hostile environments and then brag about it. Mike finally lost the ground under him. "You don't get it," he said, jabbing a finger at David. "This place runs because of me. I've put in years. I earned this role. I built these numbers. Without me—" "You're right," David said softly. "Without you, this place might finally run the way it's supposed to." Mike blinked. Just once. Slow, like he hadn't processed the sentence yet. Then the second wave hit him. "You can't—" "I can," David said. "And I will. Effective immediately. You're suspended pending further review. HR will contact you in the next 48 hours. Mike stared, pale, quiet. The fight drained out of him so fast it looked physical. He looked around the warehouse, at the racks, the forklifts, the walls he'd barked orders through, the crew he'd treated like props for his ego. No one met his eyes. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He grabbed his jacket off the hook, keys clattering against the zipper, and walked across the floor. Every step echoed. The door closed behind him. Just like that. Gone. A few guys let out breaths they'd been holding for years. Someone muttered, "Holy shit." Someone else leaned against a rack, like his legs suddenly forgot how to stand. I didn't move. Not because I was shocked, because the shock was already behind me. What I felt was quieter, heavier, relief, maybe, but not the kind that explodes, the kind that settles. David came over, stood beside me. Not close, just near enough. "You all right?" he asked again. I nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Because we're not done yet. There's restructuring coming, leadership shifts, opportunity for people who actually know how to run a floor without lighting it on fire." I looked at him then, really looked. "You think I'm one of those people?" I asked. He gave a short, dry smile. "They thought you were gone," he said. "You weren't." And for the first time in a long, long time, I realized something simple. I wasn't afraid anymore. Mike didn't come back the next day, or the day after. His truck disappeared from the lot like it had been erased, not driven away. And the warehouse changed in ways so subtle you only notice if you've spent years breathing the same recycled air. Voices got quieter. Movements got smoother. People stopped flinching when the office door opened. The kind of changes that don't make noise, they just remove it. By Monday, HR arrived with a folder thick enough to end any argument before it began. They spoke with the crew, reviewed logs, printed reports, compared timestamps to camera footage. They didn't ask me to testify. They didn't need to. The warehouse had been speaking for years. No one had listened until now. By Wednesday, the official email came through. Michael Turner is no longer employed with the company. No explanation, no dramatics. Just a sentence with the finality of a closing freight door. For the first time in months, maybe years, our lunch break didn't feel like a countdown to someone getting yelled at. The guys actually laughed. Real laughter, not the kind you use to deflect tension. And yet, I didn't feel victorious. Mike wasn't a villain I wanted to destroy. He was a man who'd built a throne on fear, and fear just finally stopped kneeling. That was enough. On Thursday, David called me into the office. Not Mike's office. That space had already been cleaned out, desk wiped, walls bare, no trace of the man who used to stand there like he owned the oxygen. Close the door," David said. I did. He gestured to the chair. I sat. He studied me for a moment, not in the way managers usually evaluate, but like he was making sure I wasn't carrying last week on my shoulders. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better," I said truthfully. "Lighter." He nodded. "Good. You handled everything clean. No escalation. No theatrics. That matters." I wasn't sure what to say, so I stayed quiet. David folded his hands. "I'm restructuring this branch. New protocol. New leadership. And I need someone who knows the floor, understands the work, and doesn't need to scream to get people to follow him." I looked at the empty desk in the corner, the leftover key hooks. the window overlooking the dock, where I'd stood soaking in rain 8 days ago. "I'm not sure I'm management material," I said slowly. David shook his head once. "You're thinking about Mike. Erase him from your definition." I exhaled through my nose, a quiet laugh without any humor in it. "That's hard to do." "I know," he said. "That's why you're exactly the person I want." He slid a new badge across the table. Different color, different access level, different weight. "Shift supervisor," he said. 6-month review. Pay bump, leadership training, if you want it. I stared at the badge. Not because I doubted I could do it, but because this was the first time someone had looked at the way I worked and seen something other than easy to exploit. "You earned this long before last week," he added. "Last week just made it obvious." I picked up the badge. It felt strangely warm in my hand, like it had been waiting there longer than I realized. "I'll take it," I said. "Good," he answered softly. "I thought you would." Things didn't magically become perfect. Warehouses don't turn into day spas just because someone gets fired. Freight still arrived late. Forklifts still jammed. Someone still spilled a whole pallet of olive oil and nearly died trying to mop it. But the air felt different, less tight, less sharp, less like a place that punished you for breathing wrong. Guys started asking questions instead of apologizing first. Breaks actually lasted the full 15 minutes. People didn't sprint to the time clock like they were escaping a prison. Small things. Important things. A week into the new job, Luis from night shift came up to me. "You good manager," he said in his rough English, tapping his heart once with 2 fingers. "No fear here now." I swallowed. Hard. "Thanks, man," I said. "Means a lot." He nodded and went back to unloading the trailer, like we hadn't just had a moment big enough to knock the dust off a man's spine. 2 Fridays later, I stood on the same dock where I'd been drenched to the bone. The sky was clear this time, wide, blue, open, the kind of weather that feels like it's making up for something. David walked over, sipping from a paper cup. "Hell of a difference from last week, huh?" he said. "Yeah," I answered. "Feels like a different place." "It is," he said. "Places change when people stop being afraid." He wasn't talking about the building. I nodded once, letting the breeze hit my face, warm where the rain had once cut cold. "You did good," he added quietly. "Really? I've seen people crumble under less." "I didn't do anything heroic," I said. "Exactly," he replied. "You didn't perform. You didn't posture. You didn't make a scene. You just told the truth. That's how strong structures fall. Not with explosions, but with weight they can't spin anymore." He tossed his empty cup into the bin and gave me a small, knowing smile. "You're gonna do well here." When he drove off, I stayed a moment longer. The dock was just concrete. The warehouse was just metal. The job was just a job. But the quiet meant something now. Not the silence of being ignored. Not the silence of fear. Not the silence of waiting for someone to call your name in the worst way. This was the kind of silence you earned. I took a breath. Not the tight, shallow kind I used to take under pressure. A full one. Deep, steady. For the first time since I started working there, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. Peace isn't dramatic. It doesn't crash in. It doesn't scream victory. It just arrives, takes a seat, and stays. And the best part? There's no one left who can send you back out into the rain.